and good evening. We are live. It's a Manx Labour Party Facebook page special with Devon in Douglas. Good evening.
Hi, how are we? Good to be here. Always enjoy chatting with you, Jed.
Well, likewise. Now, this is going to be something a little bit different. It's a Friday evening, and there may be some of you sat at home who are going to be engaging in what we're going to be talking about, but what would make it extra special is please just comment, put something in the box, ask a question, get involved and take part. So it doesn't matter which political persuasion you are, just fire myself and Devon a few questions, but we can get the ball rolling. Devon, tell me, how long have you been a Douglas councillor?
I've been a Douglas councillor for 4 months. Came in on a by-election about in the middle of October, and since then it's been an absolutely fascinating process. I've loved it. But yeah, so I'm going up in election again in 8 weeks from now. So I'm keen to hit the campaign trail now that COVID has been sorted out.
And it was quite a story, wasn't it? Yourself and Sam took the constituency by storm. It was exciting to see some new blood in the chamber, and I'd just like to ask you a few things about how the council works, because you guys, you've kind of parachuted in, not having any real experience on the governance of it. How's it all fallen? Because I've seen that council chamber. It's got its wooden panels. There's a lot of regalia about. There's a lot of photographs. It looks a bit stuffy.
It's a bit stuffy, and I think that things have been done the same way for a very long time. There are some excellent people who work in the council. There are some brilliant councillors. There are some things that do obviously need changing. And their 2016 plan for the next 5 years, we didn't see any mention of increasing access to affordable housing. And I think for a very long time, the way you became a councillor is by talking about hyperlocal issues, such as dog poo or bin storage or the lack of sort of litter around, that sort of thing. And whilst those issues are deeply important, councils were formed initially to deal with some larger, more core concerns, such as the lack of access to housing that most people have. Douglas Council used to build dams. They used to run transport companies. They used to accommodate 500,000 people a year. And now we need to sort of reclaim some of that past initiative as a way of dealing with some pressing problems we have at the moment, such as the housing crisis and climate change. And I imagine that Sam and I come in there with a slightly different perspective because we're both under the age of 35. I'm only 25 myself. And I see my friends leave the island all the time. I see people go places where property is cheaper, where there are more opportunities. And either we're going to be facing a point whereby people leave the Isle of Man, or we restructure our economy in a way that works for people who are trying to get their foot on the ladder.
Well, it's certainly caught the headlines recently, and it is definitely a housing crisis. There is no question about that. We've got thousands and thousands of people stuck in the rental trap, and yet we've got vast housing estates being built, but they don't seem to be affordable, and I think even the prices are going up as we speak. What's the story behind that?
I mean, I think it's because there are a few things driving it. One is housing prices are flying up globally. As interest rates remain low, it makes sense that investors are looking for a safe place to park money, and housing is the principal place that people go. People always need to be housed. We also see that there's been an influx of sort of wealthy investors coming to Isle of Man. We also see that new housing construction hasn't kept up pace with demand. Additionally, we do see issues such as a lot of homes are hoovered up directly buy to let. So a house is just built, and it is directly rented out for about almost £1,000 a month, if not more, straight onto the market in that way. And as such, people get stuck in an endless cycle of rent, and you might end up paying as a person in a young family 200 grand in over 15 years in rent, and you won't have an asset to show for it.
And you mentioned there £1,000 a month. That isn't unusual at all, is it?
No,
And
you're beginning to see £1,000 a month, or a little over £1,000 a month in Ramsey, which has typically had much, much, much lower housing prices. So Ramsey prices are converging with Douglas prices, and it's absolutely absurd.
And of course, the rich are certainly getting richer. If you're a landowner or a multiple property owner, this income is just going to multiply like beyond belief. So we are stuck at the moment. You look at the developments on the island. I can't think of any public housing developments. Can you? Is there anything serious going on?
There is redevelopment of existing housing estates happening in Williston at the moment, and we do see new housing being built on Peel Road, but that's mostly replacement for housing in Lord Street. We've not seen major increases to the housing stock, at least in Douglas, since the 90s in a major way. Yes, some places have been redeveloped. Yes, some places have been knocked down and replaced, but actually increasing the total number of houses we have in a really significant way hasn't really taken place in at least a generation or so. So, I mean, we need to have more council houses because that's a core part in sort of helping people on low wages earn enough to A, participate in the economy, and B, save long term. So a classic example is the fact that assume that you've got a really, really cheap rent in Douglas as a minimum wage worker of £600 or £700 a month for a single bedroom place. That leaves you with a disposable income at the end of the day of maybe 100 quid after your your absolute necessities are dealt with, which means no car, no education, no sort of long-term planning or saving, no holidays, that sort of thing. But if you're in a council house, your rent per month is closer to £200, which means your disposable income rises by 400 to 500 times, increasing by a factor of 5 or 6, which allows people to have long-term planning and have the security they need to start making economic or attaining economic freedom.
And of course, they're not subjected to the complete rogue landlords that are prevalent on the Isle of Man. There's not a robust set of legislation that's in existence, to deal with that. We know about Rotten Row. We know about these unscrupulous people who are basically keeping hardworking folk in conditions that aren't acceptable. And I know you've been out and about and you've seen them.
Yeah, we've seen people who are essential workers. I don't think that you only deserve. People who are essential workers are staying in places that have mushrooms growing out the floor. Places with incredible amounts of black mold. Their lungs are absolutely shot through in their late 40s, and they have no idea why they are so sick or why their kids have asthma. And it's because the amount of maintenance done and the amount of regulations on rogue landlords is almost non-existent. But then over and above that is the fact that the housing stock in Douglas more generally is incredibly old. Our houses were designed for a time whereby fires would circulate air around the room and push out moisture. And we have these structural problems that need to be addressed by the state taking a firm hand and redeveloping property and increasing the housing stock.
But what we're actually seeing from the state, as you say, is that there's a lot of boasting about new resident inquiries, people coming into the Isle of Man, new businesses being set up and employment opportunities. But we're seeing big building companies building these estates where the price range is basically out of reach by the looks of things for anyone who's in that service sector, whichever. And there doesn't seem to be any control on the amount that people can buy. Is it investment companies that they're going to be snapping these up? And then on top of that, there doesn't seem to be any control over making these energy efficient. Are these houses, are they the most compliant that they could be? I don't think so.
If you go to, even areas that are traditionally quite middle class, like Saddlestone, a lot of the new builds, by new builds, within the last decade, you're paying through the nose for these properties, The house is freezing in the winter. There's no sound insulation. The first house I moved to on the Isle of Man, there was a young couple that lived above us, and we heard the gory details of absolutely everything they got up to, right? I mean, people, when they do live in flats that are new builds, I mean, people have cut costs. And even like the basics, like a right to privacy, isn't embedded within that. But I think it's also one of those in which, when you have a situation whereby, when we market the Isle of Man as a place that's safe for capital, we end up having a lot of people that come in who end up competing with people who are already here for limited resources, limited space, and a limited housing stock. And since we haven't increased that housing stock, people with the fewest resources lose out on that competition.
Well, we invite folk to come and live on the Isle of Man who are under the high net worth guys, and they're paying absolute minimal tax compared to the rest of the population. And you know what, with the spare money, it could be that the banks and the gilts aren't quite as lucrative as what they were. So what's happening is that they're dipping into the property market, and this is accentuating it completely. I mean, it's well known that there's one particular high net worth who owns over 300 houses. And you tell me, what benefit is that for the economy? I don't sense it. And land is the most finite resource that we've got on the island, and it's totally going out of our control.
This is also something that both free market economists and socialists can completely agree on. I mean, Adam Smith, who was probably the founder of modern economics, was a big opponent of landlords in general. I mean, there's an entire economic term for rent seeking. So there's a big difference between investing money in a factory that will produce productive resources and investing money in homes that people need to live. Because regardless of whether that landlord's in the transaction or not, that house is still going to be there. And you end up having a situation where a mortgage for a property would be, at least a flat in Douglas, would be £300, maybe £400 a month, even after expenses, but people are paying £800 in rent instead of being able to get that mortgage. So it's because people don't have that initial bit of capital to sort of like directly invest in. They don't have the ability to sort of build what is the foundation of a family and the foundation of a middle class.
Well, one thing is for sure, that there's very little evidence to suggest that, you know, our government, our Manx government, is actually being proactive in helping Manx people to get on the property ladder, or even have the privilege of local authority housing. So we just skirted before on the green issues surrounding housing construction and what have you, and we all know that, you know, boilers are going to be obsolete in time to come. I mean, our power source is from a gas turbine power station. It's close to your heart, isn't it, the green energy side of things? Have you got any thoughts at the moment, especially with some money set aside in the budget, but we don't know what for?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is the big concern, is that money has been set aside. So following the current report, we should be socking away 20 million a year. It's probably closer to 5 in the latest budget, which is fair enough. I was expecting 0. But it's one of those things where it doesn't make sense to not take action, because at some point we're going to have to cut down our carbon emissions, and the changes we have to make the later we delay are really hard. And we had plans put aside in 2011 and in 2016 for 15% renewable energy by 2020. They haven't materialized. We had a consultation and nothing was done about it. We had a current report. Now we're having an additional climate change citizens forum. I mean, we're spending a lot of time talking and we're pumping a lot of money down the consultant hole. But there's a lot of basic changes we could make that would make life better for us and also advance environmental causes. It saves the country money long term if we insulate homes and guarantee that new homes are going to be properly insulated. If we stick solar panels on new builds, if they've got south-facing roofs, that would save money within under a decade of them being put in. A lot of these investments save us money, and it doesn't make sense why we aren't investing them. And the biggest one is probably taking this money, investing directly in projects like free public transport.
Well, if I just scout on the internet and look for grants only 30 miles away or so in Ireland or across in the UK, There's a facility there for me to get a grant for insulating my house, for making it more efficient. And these are so accessible, yet here there doesn't seem to be any of that. I mean, we do have the cycling to work scheme, which, cycling, a lot of proponents for that, but it doesn't tick everyone's box. But I'm not really seeing much else. We've seen the local authorities who've been putting the power units, for electric cars round and about. I know there's a couple in Port Erin, but who in earnest can actually afford an electric car?
I mean, £9,000 is out of the range of most people. I mean, if you do buy an electric car, good on you. But electric vehicles aren't going to be our solution in this, particularly because they do contribute to two of the biggest problems that people in local authorities and sort of locally do express. And one is the severe lack of parking and increasing amounts of traffic. So electric vehicles still need to be parked somewhere, and we don't really have enough space on our roads to park more vehicles. We need to look for other solutions that prioritize public transport and active travel.
Well, we've got, I think, over 70,000 cars registered here on the Isle of Man, and we've got a population of 84,000, so it's quite simple to do the maths on that one. I mean, should we in the future have some kind of policy that controls the amount of cars that a household can own? I think it's got to happen. I think certainly by 2030 in the UK, they're going to be geared for not producing any more, diesel or petrol vehicles. I don't know how the Isle of Man is going to deal with that. It's quite confusing. We're not getting any very strong messages, especially when at the last budget, wasn't it, when they're talking about climate control, that they wouldn't even budge from the 2050, would they? Which is quite disappointing.
It was incredibly disappointing, but also the fact that, like, during the climate change debate, there were only 6 MHKs who actually bothered to speak, and the debate happened largely as a rubber stamp. Everything Coburn said in his climate change bill went through, but it was only like 3 or 4 MHKs that spoke, and the rest voted on Coburn line and didn't really oppose it in any serious way. The actions we need to take are simple, and they're needed now. I mean, I think people are going to be very hostile to the idea of taking cars away, particularly in an island that likes motoring as much. So I think our biggest objective in government has to be to make other options more attractive than getting that second vehicle. We need to make it attractive for a family of 4 to have 1 car instead of 2, and the way we do that is by making cycling safer in our cities, if that is your thing and if you are young and healthy, but then also to make public transport easier, cheaper, more convenient and more accessible. I mean, public transport on the Isle of Man does have its issues. They've recently decided to slash loads of routes, or that's the application that Buzz Vannon has poured in. So it's complete hypocrisy for them to say, on one hand, climate change is a core concern of government, and then secondly, take public transport away from people who need it.
Precisely, and I think we need to note that Chris Thomas is going to be probing what the climate change budget allocation is going to be for precisely in the House next Tuesday. So we need to keep an eye on that one, and all credit to Chris for inquiring and investigating, just trying to nail them down. It's absolutely bewildering that you cannot just have the faith that things are happening, because it's saying the last 5 years. Just ask yourself what green progress has been made on the island. We've planted a few trees that might cover a carbon footprint for 10 people. It's just a gesture.
I mean, it is also important to note how far, at least politically, we've come. And now every politician, whether they actually do something about it or not, has to at least pay lip service. Whereas 2 years ago, the government was absolutely convinced that it had to drill off the coast of Laxey and Mackle for natural gas, which would potentially be pretty harmful to our fishing industry, and also sort of just blow any climate change commitments we make out of the water. But then, secondly, the fact that our environmental minister at the time was a hardcore sort of climate change denier and wasn't really settled on the science. But now we have a government that at least knows that this is a make or break election issue, so they're at least willing to sort of make sounds rather than actually allocate resources.
And of course, the Manx public can't be hoodwinked because it's staring us in the face. And we've got the likes of, say, a local Green Party has been formed. I note that Andrew Bentley, he's just chipped in some observation that apparently he's been seen on an e-bike. Is that referring to you, Devon? I don't know, but we'll. I hope so. But there's no doubt about it. The landscape on the Isle of Man has changed, and the views will will be looking the right way. But still, the landscape hasn't got a wind farm. That's 12 miles away, just outside our waters, and we haven't even got a piece of that. We just don't seem to have any energy. It seems to be that we're locked in to the Utilities Authority with. They've only got one choice, which is using the power station, which is running on a gas turbine. And how much does that cost? And then, ironically, we've got the gas company, where that's in all kinds of issues with the public. And there's over 20,000 gas customers who appear to be disgruntled. So it's a topsy-turvy mess at the moment.
As they should be. I mean, fuel poverty is higher on the Isle of Man than it is on the UK. And fuel poverty affects 1 in 8 households on the Isle of Man, in the 8th richest country on earth. And we pay twice as much for gas here as they do in the UK, and we pay much more to sort of heat our homes. So people have every right to be angry. I mean, and it's because we did make a disastrous investment. And now the MEA does have this sort of load of debt. And I think as a result of that, people are quite skeptical to sort of heavily invest in green energy. But there was a plan that was looked at to sort of add in 3,500 megawatts of power generation in terms of wind farms off the coast. And that would be 10 times as much as we need on the Isle of Man. And the rest could be sold as a way of paying down previous debt and paying for other services. We've seen green energy be a thing that brings in money elsewhere. And even if it didn't bring in money, it's something we'd still have to invest in because it is the morally right thing to do.
But people are going to be suspicious that it's not in the interest of our electricity company and our government for us to have efficient homes and alternative energies to choose from. That's maybe a misconception. Maybe I'm being too cynical, but are we trying to paper over the cracks of these dreadful mistakes where you're talking about a huge financial legacy, a huge millstone that is round the neck of every Manx taxpayer?
There are ways we can productively use this investment. I know what they have done elsewhere is they've used excess wind power to convert water into hydrogen that can be burnt at a gas plant. I mean, and that's a way of sort of marrying these two investments in a productive way. There are these solutions, and they were provided in the current report. I mean, as much as I don't feel as Professor Curran went far enough in sort of creating an environmental path forward for the Isle of Man, I do think that he set forth some really great options there that we could sort of use in the future. Some things we could do. So our biggest sectors we have in the Isle of Man that are responsible for climate change are firstly electricity sort of generation in the first place. The next is heating our homes, and the third is transport. And we can make really big strides in each one of these areas that makes life better. Properly insulating homes and providing people these grants. We used to have grants that gave people sort of double glazing that was taken away, or improved insulation and that was taken away. That would save people money last time and reduce carbon emissions. Sort of improving a public transport network and perhaps introducing free public transport. It would cost 0.4% of our budget, or less than a quarter of the climate change fund we currently have. And it would put money directly back into the pockets of working and middle class people, and sort of creating green energy long term. It is cheaper than gas, and we could solve our fuel poverty issue. So, I mean, advancing forward and entering into the new phase of sort of industrial society is going to help us eliminate a lot of other issues we have.
So, as a Douglas councillor, in your current position, are you able to influence or make any changes or try to shift the direction on the council? Because I know, like you said before, you've got some good people around you who must be like-minded.
Yeah, I mean, there are some absolutely excellent councillors working very closely with the Green Party. And I think there's a really bright future for cooperation between the Green Party and the Labour Party. In council, we can do a lot. So we can sort of bring our houses up to spec. We can construct new houses that are up to spec. And secondly, probably the biggest thing council could do is divest pension funds the council currently has from fossil fuels. So this has been done by a number of companies, a number of universities, and a number of local authorities across. And this would take millions of pounds out of the fossil fuel industry and allow it to invest in other resources. So it might cost a little bit in the short term, but it does protect us from the risk of stranded assets, which is the fact that like people have invested lots and lots of money in sort of oil rigs and gas extraction. But one day when demand for that drops out, the last investors there are going to be holding the bag. So we should jump out now while we can and pull money out of investing in this. And naturally, as a South African, I've got a big affinity for divestment and using pension funds as a way of bringing sort of social change, since the divestment campaign is what helped bring down apartheid in South Africa. So I do think that there is a way of sort of aligning our fiscal objectives and our moral objectives.
And I'm sure that investment clout is not just in the civil side, but it's right across the Isle of Man, isn't it? I mean, if everyone took that position, that could make quite an impact. And I'm being serious there, because of the amount of capital that we've got here, that maybe we should become a financial isle, a financial centre that just focuses on these elements of green tech and the more helpful side of industrial progress, if you know what I mean.
Definitely. I mean, another thing we could definitely do is sort of invest more in education. So Australia's second largest export is education, in which they bring students in, and that provides A, a big boost for the local economy, but B, it gives their students a world-class education. And the fact is young people in the Isle of Man are forced to leave. Education itself is a green industry. It doesn't really have any sort of major amounts of emissions linked to it. And it's something we could directly do by investing more money in the Isle of Man College. I know the government eventually plans to move in this direction, but I'd like to see it happen sooner rather than later. But in the council, we can do a lot of stuff. I mean, we do have lots of employees. We do have lots of vehicles. So sort of encouraging more work from home schemes, sort of creating a more nimble business model can do a lot to sort of reduce our emissions long term and also improve employee happiness.
But I really think what you said there has got a heck of a lot of value in improving the education opportunities on the island, not just for our young people, but almost as a campus stroke university, because that's an employment growth area. It's good for the economy. Maybe this is the way we should be looking, because let's face it, at the moment, what opportunities has the Isle of Man got for generating jobs and revenue and perhaps having something that's safe and reliable as an industry or sector?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also deeply important for young people who have gone off and studied something like a science degree across. They come back here, and because we don't have those industries here. I've got a friend, she studied science, and she's going to have to leave and go to the UK, and she could otherwise have spent 40 years paying tax in the Isle of Man, sort of helping, investing that back in the local economy, but she's forced to leave. And what we've seen is when people sort of create broad educational facilities, what pops up around that is a tech sector and spin-off industries based off graduates and based off the production of knowledge. And I think it's absolutely vital that we make steps towards sort of securing that and allowing people to come back.
And you've hit the nail on the head there, because a lot of people will know about the Marine Biological Station, which was part of the Liverpool University in Port Erin, and that was shut some time ago. We know about the dilapidated building just in the bay there, but that brought a lot of people to the Isle of Man, and it brought a lot of people to take their degree and actually come and live here. And these people are now high in their field around the Isle of Man employment circle. So there's no doubt about it, just that one small base generated a lot of good people here on the island. So the same would be said if we could just tap into something to do that. It's got to be the future.
It does have to be the future. I mean, we also cut funding for the working with Liverpool University. We cut funding for the Centre of Manx Studies, which is an absolute tragedy. The fact that the Isle of Man is a national project as much as it's a country, and as much as the government is a entity that spends taxes. There is no really strong reason why 90,000 people should have complete legislative independence, other than the fact that the country exists as a nation. And the fact that we decided to slash funding for the Centre of Bank Studies means that, yes, some people left unemployed, and also that the production of this sort of vital knowledge was lost, which is deeply unfortunate.
Well, just on the same subjects as opportunities and new growth areas, we've just had some movement on the cultivation of cannabis I think it's just for medicinal uses and so forth on the island. That has to be a good thing. I think there's a market there. Maybe we're a little bit slow in getting into that, but it doesn't seem to tick all the boxes for everyone, I'm hearing.
It doesn't tick the boxes for everyone, but I mean, we do have a dying high street, and cannabis cafes would do a lot. I mean, personally, and I am complete favor for legalization and use these tax revenues to fund treatment for people who otherwise have other mental health issues or drug-related issues, and invest that back into proper public services. So what we did see was that public services improved, mental health improved, and actual usage rates decreased in places that have legalized it. And we also need to sort of take steps toward moving this industry out of the black market, because it could be worth millions or tens of millions if we become a hub that is able to export and sort of develop an industry that works well in Europe more generally.
I think it's fair to give some credit to the Isle of Man government for at least getting to the first base. And there could be some scope to say, well, we need to tread carefully here, and we need to make sure that everything is appropriate and right, and we don't want to get bitten, really. But I do see, I mean, we could talk about the drugs topic maybe another time, and maybe invite some more people onto this. It's good that we've got quite a few viewers tonight. If you've got any comments, please put them in the box. Give us a thumbs up. Tell us if you want us to come back again, or if you'd like anyone to get involved. But there's so many topics that we could cover. I think we're just coming up to over 30 minutes now. I'm just going to ask you, what do you think the mood is in Douglas? Are people satisfied? Because it sounds like the place is full of roadworks. I don't know, it just seems to be a little bit dark. You've got a lot of shops closing in the street. That's through no fault of the Isle of Man trade. It's, matters beyond. Some real challenges ahead in Douglas.
Yeah, I mean, we do have these exceptional challenges, and people are rightly concerned. I mean, high property prices have caused high rental prices, and those high rental prices are crushing both small businesses and tenants of all ages, really. We, as Douglas, we don't have any control over pavements and roads, and I think a lot of Douglas residents would like to see that taken back and actually see more improvement there. I have recently bought an e-bike, and bombing it down the roads, I have seen my ass far more than I should have done as a result of potholes, right? I mean, it's not safe, and I mean, these aren't streets and pavements that would indicate that we are a country that has the wealth that we do. I mean, this stuff wouldn't be acceptable in many Eastern European nations that have far fewer resources. So, I mean, we do need to take steps toward making Douglas a place that isn't just attractive as a place of hiding tax, but also one that is a good place to raise kids. And that's absolutely essential.
It does seem quite obvious that we don't do roads very well, and we could explore that topic, but I think the evidence speaks for itself, and the Isle of Man, the public are not going to be kidded any further about that. But just talking about the high street, now we've got a real challenge there because people don't shop like they used to. I think the Isle of Man shoppers are good in general, but the likes of, say, car parking and bus availability and so forth, but a lot of shopping is done online. What could we do with some of those vacant shops, because the high street chains are dying? Are they going to come here?
Yeah, I think that a lot of brick and mortar retail is moving away. This is a change that is probably going to happen. So we need to move to a more experiential model of doing things. So if you look at city centres across other parts of the world, they go places where you eat out, where you dine, where you party, where you club, where you sort of consume experiences. And an experience isn't something you can purchase online. There are some things that we desperately need. There is nowhere to take your kids if you just want to have a meal in the same way. So the sea terminal used to have a small playing area, and people absolutely flooded to it. And eventually they took it away because too many people were using it. But I mean, if we had an indoor place where kids could play while their parents sat down and grabbed a coffee, it would be great. And I think sort of the same way that the Isle of Man and Douglas specifically constructed parks, bowling greens, tennis clubs to deal with sort of the needs of residents back then, we need to invest in maybe taking back some of our properties and sort of providing new services for people. We also need to encourage with maybe lowering rent and property prices more generally, more niche businesses to move into these vacant spaces.
Do you think there's scope for actually changing the use of the properties in Douglas? And I'm talking about hotels that perhaps have seen better days, and perhaps some of these shops in the town where let's just bite the bullet. Let's provide some sort of financial incentive for the property owners to get something back, and let's convert these into local authority apartments of good quality, where you get young people in the centre who are paying low rents or low mortgages or what have you, and then they've got some disposable income to spend in these funky little cafe bars and take the families, because you mentioned there about somewhere that's undercover, and instantly I just think of the Villa Arcade, up there where there's issues about redundant spare shops and things. Certainly that must be an ideal place for what you're talking about.
It would be absolutely perfect for it. And then given the fact that there's already a coffee shop nearby, I mean, I think having a place where you can take the kids in winter and you aren't just stuck in the house watching Netflix or going insane, it would have a place where you can sort of meet and hang out, and sort of kids can play with each other, particularly as we move out of a pandemic, and people can sort of regain these social skills. And especially since the Villa Arcade is something that should be invested in and retained. And creating an experiential model there would be absolutely fantastic. And I completely agree with you that certain places do need to be redeveloped. As people work from home, more offices are going to be left empty. And if we've got a housing crisis on one end and empty offices on the other, turning these offices into homes and sort of creating incentives and pathways to do that is absolutely essential.
It seems too simple that it could breathe life into our town centre that is almost turning into a ghost town now. We're just coming up to the 40-minute mark, and I think we've subjected our viewers to enough. It's been lovely to chat with you, Devon. I hope we can do it again and talk about a range of issues, because remember that we've got a election campaign in Douglas with our very own Sarah Maltby, who is out doorstepping on the streets this week and this weekend, I'm sure. So we'll revisit that, and we'll talk about what the current status is on the election front, no doubt. But I think we'll just call it a night there, Devon.
Fantastic. I think that's great.
Okay, good night.
Cheers, Jed. Thanks for having me on.